Meeting to order, Jenks Planning Commission, Thursday, July 7th, 2022, with a roll call, please.
Leon Davis.
Here.
Craig Bowman.
Here.
Dave Randolph. Jeffrey Byer.
Here.
John Brown.
Here.
Scott West.
Here.
I used up one.
We need to do an election of the Planning Commission chair, since our previous chair, Chairman, has retired.
I'll make a motion that we nominate Dr. Scott West as chair. I'd second that motion.
Leon Davis.
Yes.
Craig Bowman.
Yes.
Dave Randolph. Jeffrey Byer.
Yes.
John Brown.
Yes.
Scott West.
Yes. Another item of business before we start is election of Planning Commission Vice Chair. Nomination for Vice Chair.
Let's nominate John Brown.
Second.
Leon Davis.
Yes.
Craig Bowman.
Yes.
Jeffrey Byer.
Yes.
John Brown.
Should I abstain? Yes.
Scott West.
Yes. All right, tonight's business, item 1, consideration and appropriate action relating to a request for approval of the consent agenda.
Make a motion, we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Leon Davis.
Yes.
Craig Bowman.
Yes.
Jeffrey Byer.
Yes.
John Brown.
Yes.
Joe West.
Yes. Item number 2, consideration and appropriate action. We did not remove any items from the consent agenda. So number 3, JZ 22679, request by Amy Bauman for a zone change from AG to CS, general location 2517 West 121st Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. Let's go. I'm fine. This is a request to change the zoning from an agriculture property to commercial shopping. And if you remember back in May of this year, Amy brought this application to us for annexation into the city. This is adjacent to property that we believe will go commercial. We've met with some of the owners in that general area, and they are all looking to develop commercial entities. The property south of there is in Glenpool, and as you know, that's where the Walmart is located and some of the other commercial properties, or a lot of commercial activity going on in that corner. So the proposed use is commercial shopping. The comprehensive plan listed as residential, commercial, and business park. The plating is required, and currently it is undeveloped. I think there was a home on it at one time. Staff believes the rezoning request will be in compliance and recommends approval.
All right. Any questions, discussion from the Planning Commission?
I know this is not under a PUD. It's going to fall under the new UDO. Medical retail, is that going to include dispensary?
It could, under commercial shopping. There's actually one already adjacent to that on the Walker property.
Any other questions? Go ahead, open the floor. Does anyone wish to speak on agenda item number 3? One for number 3. Okay, we'll close the floor and entertain a motion on item number 3.
I make a motion we approve JZ 22679 for the conditions.
Second.
Let's vote.
Leon Davis.
Yes.
Craig Bowman.
Yes.
Jeffrey Byer.
Yes.
John Brown.
Yes.
Joe West.
Yes. Item number 4, JZ 22 SUP 118, request by Darren Walkup for a specific use permit to allow for a new oil well, general location 3278 West Highway 117. Mrs. Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the first time I processed an oil and gas permit, a specific use permit for that purpose in any municipality, so it was a little bit of a learning curve for me. There are about 7 wells, I think there are 7 wells on this site already. This one has already been approved by the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, or the drilling of it. They've given us the location. It's about near 100 feet from where a previous well was drilled. The code the city code has a lot more to do with oil and gas drilling than the specific use permit. So we're basically asking Planning Commission to consider, is this an okay use for this area? Staff believes that it is appropriate, that it is okay. I did show on page 21 of your staff report, it's still zoned ag, and the only residential near there is 730 feet. Our city code, I think, says you have to be at least 400 feet from any residential or habitable structure. We have a citizen who asked questions, a lot of questions, and we are in the process of really kind of nailing down how the city moves forward with oil and gas permits, because there's a lot of language that calls for inspections from the city and fees, et cetera. So we've nailed down a good portion of those processes. So initially, fire and planning and building inspections will go out and just look at everything. One of the biggest things is just confirming on a regular basis that there's information, contact information, because it's my understanding that in the past, the city of Jenks has had issues with wells that have leaked or had other problems, and there wasn't an immediate contact information for them. So things like that, just getting that policy in place, and I think we have just about everything nailed down. There's 1 or 2 questions that are still outstanding, but for the most part, we're going to put some policy in place for that. With that being said, this is item number 4, and based on everything I saw, we have a couple of conditions. They need to submit their bond and pay their building permits, but other than that, we do recommend approval of specific use permit 118. Oh, actually, there's a lot more. I do not know. Yeah.
All right, questions, discussion, comments about Tom Brown?
Sorry, I know I have the smallest font. I noted, and actually the chair may know better than I, this is the first time that I've seen one of these come up since I've been involved. So this is new territory. I noted in the zoning code, that section that says, no permit for drilling of any well shall be allowed in an AG, IM, or IH zone area if a specific use permit affecting the area has previously been approved by the Jenks City Council, and there's reference to SUP 95 that is previously on this site. So I didn't know if that was going to be affected because of that previous SUP. I don't know if that was necessarily our intent in the language of that.
Right. I deliberated with other staff. Brendan and I talked about it at length. It is my understanding and my interpretation that if there were another specific use permit, such as
It's like a church.
then we wouldn't want to move forward with approving this. But it's the same, and specific use permit 95 would be abrogated through the ordinance process, and it would no longer be effective.
That was my interpretation as well, just the language wasn't clear on it.
I know.
Is the well on the SUP 95 still active? You noted that there's 7 wells, but are they being actively pumped?
I cannot confirm that. I'll see if I can find out before.
I believe
goes to
the-
council.
I think they are.
Yes. I'm sorry for butting, but
No,
I live, my backyard is right up adjacent to there, and I do see them pumping and everything, and they were, last, I don't know, they were out there drilling for 2 weeks for this. I assume this is gonna be for this new piece, so.
Those are the only questions I had.
I will follow up and, before it goes to council, to make sure I have a good understanding of which wells are active and on that map that I provided you.
Alright, Leon, comments?
Comments.
Make sure the record shows that, Mr. Randolph was on our meeting at 6:06. Alright, go ahead, open the floor. Is the applicant present? Mr. Walker? No. Anyone wish to speak on this item, positive or against? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to confirm, like, where they did the drilling last month or so, this will be the new place.
Can you come
No.
Oh,
forward
I'm
and
sorry.
state your name
Okay,
and?
please give your name and address.
My name is Will Sixkiller. I live in the Timber Creek neighborhood right there, 11816 South 31st West Avenue.
Okay, your question was?
That is, like, where they did the drilling a month ago. They were out there about 2 weeks, just, drilling the rigs and everything. I was just wondering, my wife and I, is this the position where they're gonna put this new pump? Or is this gonna be like new drilling coming into play now at a different location?
I will have to go on site and visually inspect where they have been drilling and, find out. Because the well that they're doing is about 95 feet from one that's previous.
Yes,
Drilled.
they did that, yeah, that's where they drilled, and they have, 2 trailers out there right now.
Okay, I drove out there the other day and I did not see any activity, but I'll go back.
Yeah, there's no activity, it's just 2 trailers sitting, I guess, waiting for approval. So, I didn't know if, like, on this map itself, it's gonna show the exact location, or what.
It does. Can you zoom in a little bit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's do it this way. Oh, good.
Okay, yeah, like, right where the multiple colors are, the red and green,
Yes.
that's where the activity was.
Okay.
So,
There we go. I
I
apologize.
mean, if that's it, I have no choice.
It
I just
is,
wanna
that's where
confirm.
it is.
Yeah, right there.
Yes, okay. I appreciate you guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You go ahead, yeah, go ahead, come up to the podium, please, give your name and address.
Yeah, you want to be drilled? Yeah, where they've been drilled.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Brian, last name Dean. I'm actually Will's neighbor. I'm located at 3012 West 118th Place South. My backyard backs up to that location as well. The main reason why I was here, and I don't know, this is kind of fact-finding mission, so I don't know if you guys know the answer to this. Both Will and I have recently had to, specifically in my yard, I've had to spend about $20,000 on water diversion due to the way that land brings water into our property. My concern is depending on where that oil well is located, if that is on higher ground than where we're at and it disturbs the water the water table that's underneath that line, what is gonna be our, I guess, ability to make sure that what we've done and the problems that we've experienced already with, I mean, these homes are less than 3 years old. My home is 2 years old. We're already starting to have foundational issues. And so that, I certainly am not trying to stand in the way of somebody doing what they want with their land. My concern is if we are on the lower side of where that new well is being built, if that changes the water direction and the way the water moves underneath that surface level, we could have some serious problems, both in my yard and in Will's. And then there's probably 2 or 3 more people that would be pretty impacted. So I don't know, like, is there something that's gonna be put in writing that says, hey, if we cause damage, that they're liable, or those are kind of questions that I'm interested in.
So you can address that.
The specific use permit does not go into that level of detail. It's just generally speaking, are they far enough away to be safe from fire or explosions or things like that?
Right.
And so it has more to do with public safety than engineering. I can bring that to the attention of the city engineer, but I believe it would probably fall under the Corporation Commission and the EPA. It would be something that we would regulate.
Okay.
There may be other,
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not looking to get into a legal battle with a company that could buy our entire neighborhood. But I mean, what I've spent is significant for me,
Sure.
but it's a drop in the bucket for them. And so, now granted, I've never had any interactions with them, so it could be a simple conversation, but
so let me ask you this, currently water sheet flows across their property onto your property?
Yes.
Or you're saying that the water table under the ground
correct.
has been impacted?
Correct, so both. You have the way, now part of that, this has nothing to really do with them, it has everything to do, and I think I'm speaking for you, with our builder did a very, very poor job when it comes to grading the land. So that, we're dealing with a significant problem simply because of that. However, the land that we were built on, I believe, was previously used as part of the oil field. And so what we're dealing with these water issues are not only natural springs that are under the surface, but also leftover water that gets pumped into those holes. Like if you have 5 million barrels, for example, only 2 million is going to be under pressure, right? So after those 2 million have come to the surface, they're going to pump water down there to bring that oil to the surface. So we have, for instance, some of the drains that I just put in are pushing out roughly 3 to 5 gallons a minute right now. It hasn't rained in, what, a month? And so there's a significant water problem that is impacting all those homes. And like I said, my concern is the money that I just had to do to make sure my house is safe could potentially be all for naught. So, and it could be fine, like if the location where they've already came to the grade, that would be on lower ground than where all the properties are and closer to the street. I don't think there's anything downhill that's going to be impacted, but if they're moving it up to where I think most of that equipment went up to, which is to the east of our property, that's all on higher ground, and so potentially everything below us could be impacted. So,
This particular well is a directional well and it goes west. I know that much. But I would say any other questions that, the Corporation Commission was very, very responsive to my questions, and you may very well reach out to them in this. In the staff report, it has the well name and number, and you can use that information when you present it, if you call them. With the questions?
Corporation.
Yes, and I literally just went online and I Googled it and just found a name, and then I called a different name and they both called me back. So they have a Tulsa office and they were very responsive, and then the state office also called me back.
Yes, yeah, and they may be the people to address like what, I guess, if our homes start to float away, who
Yeah. Because they do talk about some of those things. Honestly, you can just have this portion of the
So you have 10.
I'll give you this.
Yeah, Mr. Dean, how far did you say your home was located from the property, approximately?
He's on the
back
north
up to-
boundary.
So my property line shares the
He would be over 700,
Be over 700 feet.
So,
over 900.
Okay.
so I guess this map that was sent out, I don't know if you have that one to reference, I can point this out, but we're basically these homes that. are
The
along
addition
this-
to the north then.
Correct. So, like I said, if it's to the east of us, there's potential that all of that's gonna come our direction.
You can keep this information. It has the information that they submitted to the city, so it is a public record,
Okay.
and it has some contact information for the commission.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else?
That's,
Let's see, I have any questions. I said my piece.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Anybody else wish to speak on this item? Chair sees no one. Close the floor. Further discussion, questions?
Just one recommendation, if we pass this on to council, maybe a recommendation that Counselor Isbell take a close look at this, because I think he's the only one that I'm aware of on the council that has experience in this particular industry. Since it appears 2012 was the last SUP that was approved on this, so then it sounds like the residential addition might have come in after SUP 95, so we don't want to adversely impact new homes. So, yeah.
Make sure it's-
All right, there's a motion, number 4.
I'll go ahead and make the motion that we approve JZ 22 SUP 118 with the stipulation of additional evaluation by council to make sure that everything is in conformity because of the new residential addition to the north.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion second, Ms. Rhodes.
Leon Davis,
Yes.
Greg Bowman,
Yes.
David Randolph,
Yes.
Jeffrey Byer,
Yes.
Sean Brown,
Yes.
Chair West.
Yes. Item 5, JZ 22 PUD 135, reviewed by Alan Betson
You all right?
for a planning unit development, PUD 135, along with the change to the underlying zoning of RTH, CS, RS3, RS2, and RS1, the general location, under construction. And else.
Thank you. This is our first residential subdivision since the adoption of the new zoning code in April. So it looks and feels a little bit different from, at least from our approval side. I think the nuts and bolts of the PUD are pretty similar to what we have seen in the past. But a little bit, the requirements and the evaluation has changed. So this particular project was a former oil and gas development land area. And so we've known for some time that it would probably go residential. It was recommended in the comprehensive plan for residential development. We also know that the property north of there cannot have habitable structures on it. So it's right in the middle of a very, very strategic area that was something previously trying to become something new. The engineer of record is present this evening and is acting as the consultant on this project. I have heard from them, and we knew early on that they were, during their due diligence phase, that they were going through all of their EPA approvals, et cetera. So they know where the hot spots are, if there are any, on the site, and they have protected those areas accordingly. They have looked at the site from a blue line and from the preservation perspective. They've also made those considerations and have protected those areas on the site. So that being said, the current zoning is industrial medium intensity, and they are requesting a planned unit development. And that is because when we wrote the new EDO, we wanted to get away from planned unit developments, but at the same time, we only have a few pockets of raw land left to be developed. And since that really has been the platform for residential development especially, we went ahead and said, if the applicant has a project greater than 20 acres, then they will still need to go through the planned unit development process for residential. And this is far more than 20 acres. So there are two actual lots, record, two parcels, I should say, totaling a little bit over 200 acres. One of the things that the city is eager for, and that is street right of way, because this does impact our Elm Street project and I think 121st, I can't remember. I went down to the city engineer's office to confirm the street projects and the timing. I know we're still in the process of obtaining street right of way, and they are willing to dedicate that right of way during the planning process. And if their project is going to hold up the overall street project, then I believe they'll do it by separate instruments and clean it up during the plat. So very happy to hear that. It currently is unplatted and platting is required, and I've had at least 2 citizens contact me, and Mr. Covey has, or Covey, I don't know exactly how to say the name, has contacted me twice, very concerned about traffic and inadequate street infrastructure, but as we just said, part of the bond project is that expansion of Elm Street. This is in Glenpool Schools. Let's see here. So on page 63, starts talking, I went ahead and put in here the UDO language. So I called each of you and just asked, hey, there's, based on the way the new UDO is written, do you want to continue this item and talk through some of the talking points of the UDO, or let them put that stuff, put those details into the PUD and then bring it back? But everyone was comfortable with moving forward, so that's where we're at. So the purpose, I'm gonna read a couple of these things out loud. So the UDO language is found in 16-9-8, and the purpose is to basically to encourage flexibility and to accomplish the following: to stimulate creative approaches to commercial, residential, and mixed-use development of land, more efficient use of land, to preserve natural features, provide open space and recreation areas in excess of that required under conventional zoning regulations, to develop new approaches to the living environment through a variety of types, design, and layout of buildings, transportation systems, and public infrastructure, and to create unified building and structures through design, and to promote long-term planning pursuant to the Jenks comprehensive plan. So, excuse me. Part B are the general provisions. And this is where it says any residential development greater than 20 acres shall be a planned unit development. And right up before adoption, the code did read any development greater than 20 acres. We did change that so that it did not include commercial, knowing that we have some large swaths of land out near Highway 75 that is going to develop, and they're going to have design standards based on there, but we didn't see any reason to force them into a PUD. So we added the word residential development greater than 20 acres. Number 2, developments including only single-family detached residential uses may not be approved as a planned unit development. So next month we'll have 2 or 3 planned unit developments, and the applicant for one of those called and was like, hey, what about number 2? And he read it to me, and I said, what page is that? Because I really did not know what he was talking about. And my first thought was, that's not what our code says. But sure enough, it does. So I went back, and Brandon, being my sounding board and being forced to sit through every single long UDO meeting we ever had, talked to him and to Tanner Rush, who's our community development coordinator, and said both of them have spent enormous amount of time, many, many hours, and I said, hey, this is what the code says. I don't remember it at all. You tell me what were we thinking, because I had my own idea about what we were thinking, but I wasn't sure. And Tanner says, oh, that just meant that they have to make sure that they have amenities and open space, and it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't intended to say residential uses only. It was meant to be, if you do a residential development, you must provide amenities and open space for the development, because if you're familiar with surrounding areas, there are developers who come in from other areas and they don't necessarily provide amenities or open space for their residences. And so that was the purpose behind it. If we need to tweak that in a couple months when we update the UDO to better state our goal, then we probably will. But in this case, the project does include a mix of uses and it's kind of a key point. And they do have open space. So moving on. Each planned unit development should be presented and judged on its own merits. It shall not be sufficient to base justification for approval of a PUD solely upon an existing PUD. The burden of providing evidence and persuasion that any planned unit development is necessary and desirable rests with the applicant. And the planned unit development application shall specify the rules by which the parcels shall be developed and the site plan that satisfies the developed purpose. So in the past, we've always asked for at least a sketch version of a site plan, and that's what you have before you. At this level, I try to always remind the planning commission, the council, and the public that these are concepts. I wish it would be lovely if every time we had a case that this was all buttoned up and nailed down, but it's just not. They say, generally speaking, this is what we think we're going to do. This is the size of lots we are planning for, and this is our best guess at this time. And they have provided that information. The other thing is the design standards or the regulations, and they did a very good job of going through and saying this is what the UDO says, and this is where we would like to deviate, and I'll point that out a little bit later. One of the things, when you get down to site development allowances and modifications, previously I always said, give me the chart, you show me what our chart says, and then you tell me what you're going to do, because there are certain Vulcan area and other standards that they know as a development group that they can't meet, or it's just not right for their product, and so they're going to ask for something different. And that's exactly what they've done. One of the bonuses, and again, I'll point this out, they did ask for deviation on height in one development area. They also asked for the impervious, and that was something I actually pointed out to them immediately, because the city of Jenks has not really ever, when you go through the building permit process, it wasn't a priority, and it was never even explained, from my understanding, to the building department prior to me coming to look at the livability space. So if someone came in and they built a house and then they wanted to put a building and a pool and they just keep going, well, you only have so much green space and you only have so much area that you're allowed to put impervious. So in the new code, it changed from livability space to impervious area. And I knew that what was proposed was very rigid based on the request that we get as a city for accessory buildings, and now we're allowing all these accessory things, but saying that the impervious area has to be really small. So I pointed out up front, you probably want to look at this, because if you're going to go by the code, someone's going to bring me a building permit and they're not getting their pool because they're not going to meet the impervious area. So they made those adjustments. And then as a staff, we talked really at depth about that impervious area and really requiring the engineer to dig in and make sure that they're designing and engineering their stormwater to meet the higher impervious demands. Because I think something that may happen from time to time is we do fill up our lots with a lot more impervious, and so it causes more runoff. So just letting you know, one of the things that they did also is they asked for RS3 and RS2, but they actually exceed the lot widths. So they came out higher than what was required instead of lower than. Those were the biggest things. Excuse me. Item number 2, where it talks about modification of standards, it says you must, in the new UDO, it says you must align with at least one of these things. You must look at your public gathering space. That's one of the options that we really said. We want at least one of these included. Number 2, sustainable design. Number 3, landscape conservation and visual enhancement. D, mix of uses, E, affordability, F, universal design, and G, quality building materials. Excuse me, I do not know what took me up. Letter D, standards for review. So this is kind of, approval of development through the use of the PUD process will be considered by the city only in direct response to the accrual of tangible benefits from the PUD to the city or the neighborhood to which it should be located. And these benefits shall be in the form of exceptional amenities, outstanding environmental improvements, landscape, architecture, site design, or conservation of special man-made or natural features of the site. I'm not going to read any more of them to you, but I just wanted to kind of hit the highlights of what the UDO now says versus what it used to say. So it's in some ways more subjective. In other ways, it kind of identifies some of the things we would have liked to have seen in the past, but maybe didn't articulate. So I also want you to think of it in terms of, I have told everybody from the beginning, if there's anything we really want to amend after using the UDO for several months, if you feel like this really does capture the direction that we have wanted to go and our expectations. So just be thinking through that. We don't have to have that full conversation tonight, but definitely have it on your mind as you're approving PUDs. I had a lot of comments starting on page 7 of 9 of my staff report. They have provided the additional PUD language. They've given us the minimum square footage per development area. And I reminded them of the garage setback. And I should have told you all where that is found in the code. So I know in one way that you can say it, and the garage setback is something that came through council. And you all have talked about it quite a lot also. Many of these homes have multiple bedrooms, which means they probably have many kids who are going to turn 16 and have cars. And those cars end up stacking into the sidewalk, and we have a ordinance that says you can't block the sidewalk, so it becomes a real issue. So getting that garage set back far enough so that we're not blocking the sidewalks when we're stacking our cars, because even with a 3-car garage and 4 kids, and their friends and their their sleepovers, sometimes you just can't help it. So trying to remedy that. Sidewalks, that's been addressed. Work with staff to revise the site plan to add additional, they've gone through all of these. One of the big things was nodes and links. They have accomplished that. And then they've also gone through on the data sheet that they've given you and talked about their public gathering space, sustainable design, and these other issues. I pointed out to them, these are just questions from staff. They did give us information on phasing, and then also making themselves familiar with traffic impact analysis. We are in the process of completing our traffic impact analysis, and that is why that street right now is being widened. So that would not, in my mind, be applicable at this time. Street design standards, again, this goes back to, this is already in the works, so there are changes internally for collector streets and things on what would have been allowed previously. There's also changes to how you have to landscape, etc. So they are very much aware of all of these things, the anti-monotony standard, the parkland provision, etc. So with the additional information that I have received, I've read through it, I feel pretty comfortable with everything that they have given us. If you look on page 70, it actually starts the planned unit development. If you look on page 72, development area A is commercial shopping. That's about 8.5 acres. Development area B is RTH. So one of the things that they talked to the city when they very early came in is getting a higher density in a portion of the project. So there are different ways to do that. You can do it through townhomes attached. You can do single family detached. You can do that look and feel like the project at 111th and Highway 75. You can do apartments, and they have chosen to do the style that you have seen coming up out of the ground at 111th and Highway 75. So it'll be more of a cottage style, detached, so no apartments and not a traditional townhome. Development area C is going to stay IM, but it'll be for personal storage facility. That's about 4.8 acres. Development area D is an RS3, and I pointed out to you that they actually have larger lots than what the code requires. They did not go all the way down to the minimum lot width. RS, and that's a 1,200 square foot minimum, and Mr. Betcham said habitable space. So that's the actual house, not including the garage, or garages, whatever. 1,700 square feet in development area E, which is RS2, which is about 35 acres. Development area D was 43 acres, and development area F, which is RS1, 1,800 square feet, with a minimum lot width of 70, and that's about 70 acres. I won't go through the amenities. If y'all have any questions, you can talk to Mr. Betcham when he comes up. On page 75, it shows that matrix. They did a great job of doing exactly what I was asking. They showed one of the things, they showed that on the minimum lot width, they 52 and 60, but they are putting a greater restriction on that than what the code would allow. And then on the height, on the PV development area RTH, that they could go higher. An impervious coverage area, 70 feet, or 70%, 85% in the industrial, and in the RS3, 70, which is 10% higher, RS2, 70, and RS1, 70. I can tell you from the planner seat, it is really, really, really sad when grown men cry because they cannot put the bull their wife wants. Really sad. And it's happened many times. So I'm sorry, but you cannot do it. If you look on page 79, Exhibit D kind of shows the different development areas. I will, moving forward with council, make sure that the development areas are labeled with their square footages on there. They have a preliminary connectivity. This was a new thing that was in the code, trying to make sure that we don't have those long running roads and streets and things. And I think I wasn't gonna get into Mr. Betcham's responses. If you want to, we can, but I don't have anything else to say. I felt like that they came back with the information I was looking for. So if you have any questions for me, I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, I would say you can talk to Mr. Betcham.
I do have one question. When you're looking at 121st Street, I noticed this is preliminary.
This is what?
This drawing is just a conceptual drawing of the layout. But is there some consideration going to be taken to line these drives up? Because right now, the way it lays out on South Forest Place, the drives are staggered. They don't line up.
That's definitely something that we can look at.
And that's an issue. That's a traffic issue. That's actually just waiting to happen. On the South Plum Avenue, that one lines up. On 121st Street, or with the new improvements, are they going to bury those power poles?
I do not think so.
Because right at the 125th entry, that one gets hit and it knocks out the power for the whole side, the east side of that road, for all the houses in the neighborhoods, because cars try to go around to stop cars and they hit the pole. And when it's raining or there's ice or whatever, they hit the pole. So we get a new pole like 3 times a year over there. And so I would hope that would be addressed, because this is kind of dumping more traffic out there in proximity to that pole. And so I just want to point that out. And let me see if there's anything else in here. There's like a natural little trail road that dumps out in front of the fire station there,
Mhm.
and it kind of gives like a little natural access to the site. Is there going to be something on that backside that's going to be allowable for, should someone have a heart attack or something? The way this is laid out, they got to snake through there to get to the houses on the west. If there's a little natural access right off of 121st right now, right across from where the paramedics would be at, where they have like a little fire lane. I think we did that on 131st. That addition that came in there, we had like a little paver access point off of that to allow fire trucks and police and fire to access those houses to the back way, dedicated solely to them. Is it possible to see something like that here, since we have that feature already there naturally, and then we have the paramedics across the street, and they have that same access point given off the backside of those houses somehow? That's just something I want to throw out there.
Sure,
And look
yeah.
at it.
So that's in the RS3 development area?
I think that goes to your question about the number of access points in the street connectivity. And I'd be curious to know, again, because on the small maps, you can't really see how many access points are there into this 205 acres total off of the main arteries.
Okay.
Did you have? I had just one other general thought. First of all, I really like this land use, and I really am impressed about the diversity that has been presented in this proposal, and it's going to be a good use of land. One of the concerns that I did have, this is again one of the first times we've seen something go from one type of zoning to 6 different standards. So we're into some uncharted territory. And one of the concerns that I had was in our UDO when we talked about development standards and green space and open space. This is because we're looking at 6 different areas. I understand why they have this proposed layout the way that they have, because there's a water, call it a water feature, I guess, a natural topography on the site. But all of the open green space is consolidated into 2 areas. And if we look at the development areas for the RTH, RS1, and RS2, I'm sorry, the RS1 and the RTH, there's no adjacent access to the green space. So a concern that I have is there going to be green space incorporated in the final plat or layout that will be for these other residential areas? Because if they're consolidated, then again, those residents won't have access to it. So that's a concern. And that, again, that could require a major rethink of the layout design that they have. One other quick comment that goes back to the UDO. After 3 reads, I don't know how I missed this, and maybe somebody can explain this one to me because I've reread it. On page 64 of the report, item E under the modification standards, affordability of the plan unit development includes residential dwellings that are deed restricted for households that make less than or equal to 80% of the area median income. I understand the last part, 8% of the median income, but how do we get, what's the deed restricted for the households? Is that basically going to be a price range? How is that defined? Because I've gone back and I'm not sure I can understand that one myself.
That one, deed restrictions can be done through the planning, or they can be done through actual deed title work. But in this case, I do not think that they have chosen to activate that particular standard, and so it would not be an issue on figuring out how they would prefer to do it. It's not really
May not be
relevant in this case.
may not be applicable, but it'd be good if we could get city attorney to give us some better understanding. Can you put your arms around that
Well,
one?
I think, like you said, you can have restrictive covenants that are in the deed. So to me, that's kind of what deed restriction means. So
Right.
I'd still appreciate the city attorney's input.
Yeah, because this is above or below 80% of that median income, so we might just need to look at that language, revisit it.
I didn't remember.
But wouldn't that be accomplished by the makeup of the house itself to accomplish that?
That's one of the points that Mr. Betcher made when, in his response, is that in providing the rental units and the smaller homes in that RTH development area, it does meet the intent, it just wouldn't be deed restricted
Right,
based on
right.
income.
Because I've seen it accomplished that way without having to deal with deed restriction. I think that's unnecessary.
We probably need to really decide if we're comfortable with the way that G is written, and if that's how we want it to stay moving forward. And it could be like they have done, they've provided a portion of their development that's bringing you a different product, and so they meet the intent of that even though they're not doing the deed restriction. So just something that we need to think about moving forward, and I will get the city attorney's input.
Just a quick comment, I echo Commissioner Brown's comment that this PUD really seems to check the boxes for the trade-off between more amenities and green space. It looks like an interesting development. I'm excited about that aspect. I did just have a question. Well, you mentioned some sort of environmental condition on this property, or am I mixing that up? Okay, and you know, kind of just going into this, my thought is I don't want to do something that's harmful, you know, to people living on it. I mean, often there's oil and gas, and there's ways to cap that or, you know, handle it. And there's rules and regulations for it. But can you just speak to the environmental side?
I haven't seen the reports. It was something that was brought up, and it's something that's just been known because of its previous life and the uses out on that land. But I have brought it up probably in every single pre-development meeting we've had. And what about the past life? And they have done their due diligence. I have not seen it yet, but it would be part of the planning process. They'll have to provide all of that documentation showing that if there was an issue, it has been remediated and that they have approval now from the EPA or whatever jurisdiction. We can take a closer look at that during the planning process.
So preliminary plats, then we'll have the prior wells, they're capped off, marked with the map, thanks.
You'll see the topography, the wells that used to be there and all that goes on the preliminary plat.
Okay, thank you.
What else? Will?
I'm just gonna be curious about to see what the EPA work comes back on, because this is not a clean area.
It's a tank farm.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and some land that's not clean.
We've always been told that you'd never develop it, ever.
I just kinda, I don't think that people really, I like the development myself in terms of what it's offering, but it does bring a lot that is not gonna be comparable in terms of value of houses on the east side of Elm, by any stretch of imagination, but it's gonna bring more people. My concern is just gonna be the flow of traffic. You know, if there's improvements taking place on Elm, which I'm sure that's gonna happen, but 121st gets a lot of cars as well. And so would this trigger some, you know, I don't think it would be a tough issue to get some additional right of way on 121st between Elwood to Elm, because there's nothing there, you know, that would hinder that. But I think that this would trigger some thought that has to improve 121st if you put this many houses out there on that intersection. I just think there's going to be some issues there.
Marcy, can you remind me on RTH,
Yeah.
the number of cottages that's determined by the size of the cottage, the size of the lot? Remind me, what governs the total count that can be put into the space?
So, let's find that chart. changed how we look at things from the old code to the new code. And I apologize, I did not bring my code book with me, I brought in other things, but not that. So one of the things that we could look at is the comprehensive plan, and that's a guide, and this said medium intensity. So because they have a combination of intensities, it's generally, the idea is that you can borrow intensity from one area and put it in another area. So you could have a higher intensity here because you were giving us a lower intensity over here.
Okay.
So if it were X houses per acre, for the whole project, and then you could look and see how many did you add. And I, from the comprehensive plan perspective, because it's a guide, I don't really dig too deep into it. That was something that, other planners, we all have our sword that we die on. I'm more about impervious area than density, so they did the larger lots and the different densities, and if I had my book, I can email you, but I cannot answer it at this exact moment, and I apologize for that.
That's okay, I was just trying to look at that area and make sense of the layout and the count.
Right.
But it sounds like that's determined through an overall assessment of the entire development.
Right.
This may go into Commissioner Davis's question about the traffic flow in that area. I guess maybe we won't know about this till we get the preliminary plating, but what will the total number of rooftops be added to this whole 205 acres? How many warm bodies are going to be added to this area?
The traffic impact study that was done would have accounted for that increase based on the comprehensive plan. So because we did slate it for some commercial and medium intensity single family, they would have taken that density and included that in their analysis for the expansion of this. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have an in-depth conversation with Chris Cole before tonight. He was gone until yesterday. He was out of town, and I kept forgetting, and today I did not remember.
Any other questions, discussion? When, on the floor, we say applicant is present. Okay. The applicant is present, like to come forward, give your name and address, and, enlighten us, please.
That's right. Alan Betchen, 200 North McKinley in Sand Springs.
No, microphone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Is the light on, Alan?
Maybe. Okay, let's try that.
Still can't really hear you.
I'll try to be loud. Let me try that.
That's fine.
I think you kind of see we're wrestling with trying to grab the UDO and figure out how to form a PUD and make sure we're meeting the metrics that we're really shot for. And we tried to be very intentional about our layout. We've met with the city a few times discussing connectivity and as far as that collector routing that's that you see running north and south. There are more conversations to be had about number of connection points to the arterials. So stepping back, not as planner, but as engineer, that's my struggle because the engineer says don't connect to the arterial frequently because that's conveyance, but less turning points is more through movement. But then the connectivity in the planning side says more connectivity, it gives you more options to get out and it makes it more convenient. So there's a balance that's always struck there. And if I'm honest, we swung probably a little too hard toward engineer on that, and not enough into additional connection points. So I would presume, and I think that's some of the staff comments that we've already started getting some feedback on the layout, is a couple of extra connections from the individual pods to the arterial without having to go through the collector. One of the things that's really strongly supported in the UDO is that common public space and gathering space. That's one of the things that came up and was pushed. That's the reason that we really were trying to consolidate the green space and make it so you can put a more meaningful amenity package together, and there already is pretty impressive pond on the site, so it makes sense to wrap that around that. It is directly fronting, and will have direct access to the collector street that runs north and south to help with that connectivity, so it is accessible. As you get into the larger homes, the community amenity becomes less important. I'm not saying irrelevant, but you start getting more backyard amenity associated with it on those larger lots, so pools on site. So we chose to center that amenity into the smaller product offerings because we feel like that's going to be the more often used. The RTH product will almost certainly have its own amenity associated with it internally in green space and in pool and common area, but it still has access to the overall because again the UDO was really clear about creating theming and trying to be commonplace with the overall project. We've tried to be very cognizant of what the site used to be. The reality is before the Chevron was pretty clear about their releases before we even went into contract, but we went further and had a separate environmental analysis performed on it that included multiple wells, monitoring wells that they pumped to find hydrocarbon, and there was only one hotspot that was located on the entire tract, and that's being left undeveloped. So from a due diligence standpoint, from an environmental, I don't know how you can go farther than what's been done. There was literally a monitoring grid installed, and we have certification. We're happy to bring that forward whenever we bring that the final plat or the preliminary plat. One of the things that has came up that is so first there will be full right-of-way dedication along the north boundary, so it's going to get a full arterial dedication of the right-of-way at the time of plat. So it is getting more land associated with that. So enough to accommodate what is theoretically the future ultimate widening. What is unique about Elm is because of alignment issues, the city really wants to offset the road a little bit and needs additional right-of-way beyond what is required by the plan. I will not tell you this layout yet accommodates that because we didn't know about it whenever we did it, but we're fully willing to donate that additional right-of-way. That's even outside of the 50 that's required. This is really trying to be cognizant of what the realities of development today. That 80% number for median income, we ran the math on that. Ooh, that is a rough number it depends, and you better, we had to take Jenks as the area median income because if we looked at the Tulsa MSA, it was pretty small to make that 80%, and you couldn't honestly qualify for a 1,200 square foot house for what it can be built for today. You'll never, that 80% of the median won't qualify for it. I want to be very clear about that. We tried. We ran the math on it. It's just not possible. The house square footages that you see in this, and there's a range of plans that are in each of the product offerings. The minimums are what we're showing is the smallest. It's the smallest. It accommodates the smallest house offered. That is not by any means the average size that is presented in each one of those. I went back and asked that question, okay, what is the average? And that the 1,200 square foot minimum averages a little over 1,500 square foot is the average house size in it. The 1,700 square foot minimum that we have averages a little over 2,100 square feet. And the 1,800 minimum averages a little over 25. Average house that's actually built. The realities of development costs and what your fixed costs are, as you get into the smaller and less square footage, your square footage costs go through the roof because you have so much in your lot and the land underneath it. So people are erring to a larger house just to offset the square footage costs to make the appraisals work. I think this meets all of the requirements. We're certainly understand that there's going to be more discussion with staff as far as developing the layout and finalizing that because we do need to account for the additional right-of-way takings that are asked for. And I think we've already exceeded the connectivity as far as the links and nodes that are required, and that'll only get better as we make additional connections. So I think what we're offering is a very good use of a tract of land that is industrially zoned and brings in something that's a benefit to the community. I'm happy to answer any other questions specifically. Townhomes, it's 2,300 square foot per dwelling unit, so it's actually based on the underlying area. So there's actually in the chart, there's a 2,300, so it is still area tied to the underlying use.
That's an RTH.
So per dwelling unit. So it's that's how you control your number of units. So kind of asking what is that density number? That's how you get the density that's afforded you is so it's actually, if you compare that to what apartments are, those are closer to, 450 to 600 square foot per dwelling unit is what you see. So you're talking about a much denser, from a garden style apartment. This is a much less intense development. And it's because we're not structured height wise. We're looking at, we asked for the 45 because there is a product that is more townhome that they are looking at that is true 3-story, like connected units, 4 units connected, could be part of it. That's why we're asking for the height, is really to accommodate that kind of more urban type feeling townhome. Be happy to answer any other questions. Hopefully I got it all out there.
So you mentioned there was one hot spot. Is the hot spot you mentioned, is that where they appears to have like an active well?
So, and I'm in shallow waters, so I'm civil, I'm not environmental. So I would somewhat defer that we'll have to bring that back with the environmental analysis so I can show you and we can read through it and say this is exactly what it says. My understanding of what this was used for was less well, more tank battery. And so this isn't a drill well issue. This is tank battery sitting there and there's been spills that have occurred over the time and they have or tanks that leaked or pipes that leaked, an underground pipe. And so you're really worried about plume contaminations that are sitting on top of groundwater or just actual soil contamination. And there was only literally one well that exceeded standard. And so there's an area that we quarantine off around that, and we say we don't do anything here from a use standpoint. That is my, here's my 50,000 foot of what I understand and read of that as not an environmental engineer, to be very clear with you. But it was very thoroughly evaluated at great length, I can tell you.
Was the pond tested as well?
Yes. Yeah, there was.
Yes, it's big bass.
I
Tested it numerous times.
I know that we had crews on site shooting water surface elevation so we could correlate those to plume and contaminants so that you could actually see what the groundwater levels were doing so that they could, and there was a grid of wells installed. Just so that we could get that kind of, because as a developer, especially Shaw, this isn't their only project, and it's not their only project in the area or the state, and it's not their last one, so they don't ever want to get tied to, hey, we didn't do our due diligence and do the right thing. They stand behind the product, and they're going to be there for, this is a many-year build-out project, so they don't need there to be problems in the first couple because there was environmental issues, because now they've got a project they keep out of.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of some of that wall cleanup stuff that was done in Kiefer. Some of the houses, the proposed sizes and configuration kind of looks a lot like that development that took place in Kiefer by the new high school and the track.
I think that was Brownfield, which is a little.
Yeah, it was a little EPA.
It's an EPA brownfield, and there's capping and things that go with that.
Right.
That is not. This is not metal contamination. This was true. The soil testing came back negative, and then it was groundwater traced to make sure there was no groundwater issues. That's a different. There is a method to go through that, and then you do start kind of choosing where you put footings because you don't want to disturb under a certain level. That's not what we have here, and we have an all clear except for on one well.
Like a phase 2 environmental?
Oh, beyond, way beyond the phase 2.
Right.
Phase 2 says there's an issue, you should look into this. This is not only because this was still owned by the oil company, so Chevron still owned it, Shaw purchased it from them. Before that, so not only we didn't accept their clear bill of health because they can have a vested interest in telling you it's a clear bill of health, we came back in and had an independent environmental done, and part of what they required was that grid analysis to verify that there was no groundwater hotspot, so that they could give it truly a clean bill of health. So I mean, really, that should be a testament to the clean efforts that Chevron gave. To be really honest
I'd
with
say
you,
that's a super positive thing that Chevron would even sell the property, because I've heard for years and years that they'll never sell it because they don't want to mess with it.
they wouldn't for a long time, so they went through and did a whole bunch of.
They're not gonna put their butt in the swing when they sell it either.
That's right. They have liability. Yeah. Whenever they walk away because they were the operator that caused the problem, if there was a problem, that's not which I think is ultimately why they were able to get the project done, was because they went to the next level to help them indemnify, to show what it was. And I can just tell you what the testing was by people who are way smarter than I am about that. That is Mr. Blackshear's game, and he did a lot of holes.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Anyone else in the audience tonight wish to speak? Sir.
I'm the planning commissioner, Jim Dennis, at 12610 South 2nd Street in Jenks for my house. Anyway, my question is, again, it's nothing reflecting on this development, but about, maybe some of you live out on Elm, about 7-8 months ago, Highway 75 was experiencing some difficulty, I think, up on 44, if I remember correctly. The intersection at 111th Street in Elwood was shut down, and all traffic went to Elm. Anybody remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, where in the world all this stuff come from? And then I realized that there's 3 north-south arteries out of this area, and that's it. 2 of the 3 were shut down. So, again, growth happens. You guys are in charge of that. I get it. What is the dovetailing of widening Elm along with this particular? Obviously, it's a multi-year build out. That's not even in doubt. But what is the schedule of when Elm will be widened, or is there one? Does anybody know?
There is a schedule. They're in the process of obtaining the right of way currently. And I believe they already have it they've started the design process. I think, I was trying to look at this phasing. By the time they get through plating and the other things, we should have secured all the right of way. So it will probably be very close within a year or so of by the time you fully develop, we should be way past the street widening.
Well, I don't think there'll be front-end loaders and graders out in this property tomorrow, but, so what you're saying is that the widening process will be well underway
Yes.
by the time this begins to get kicked off.
Not by the time, yeah, by the time it gets kicked off, I mean, I could see them out there, whether it's change permit, grading, probably preliminary plat, and then the road project starting at the same time.
The Elm project and this project started about the same time. Okay. So we're looking then at about a year down the road, is that correct?
That might
For
be,
planning purposes?
yeah, that might be a little, I would say 2 years.
2 years, okay. All right. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bill Rogers, 705 East, 119th Street South, Jenks, and been around about 18 years since with, actually, vice president of the Slate Creek Homeowner Association, and been on that many years. But I've actually been here long enough to know where Elm was a four-way stop, and then watched it to go to an intersection, and it was a night and day difference. We had the same nightmare at Elwood and 121st. And it's my understanding, 3 years ago, I was going to meetings where the county was gonna widen to 3-lane and fix the intersection with the lighting and appropriate lanes. It's my understanding, though, at this point, the city is deferring that to 91st Street. And there's nothing being done in this county's plan as far as fixing that intersection. I just urge, I don't know if this is the right environment or where this platform does, but part and the recommendation I'd love to see from the planning commission is to push city council to get that ball rolling. Because this many, I love the development. I think it's going to be a great asset for Jenks. But that many new citizens, which is your direct route to 75, is going to be a disaster on Elwood and 121st Street. And all you have to do, if you just fix the intersection without even widening the roads, it will make all the difference, the same way it did before. As far as traffic flow, the stop sign is just, it's not working. So, thank you.
Charlotte Montgomery, 10612 South Fir Avenue. I agree, I like this HUD, all the different uses and everything. Yes, I thumbs up. I did have 2 points though. I have talked a little bit with Marseille about that. Had quite a few questions for her on the previous item and on this item on remediation and the wells. They have an environmental analysis report. That's obvious from what the engineer has just told you. I do strongly suggest that the city, I don't know if it would be more appropriate for planning and or the engineer to take a look at that analysis and then either summarize it or have it on records of that when you take that to the council, because they're gonna get all these same questions and concerns. He has a report, get a copy of the report, and then have some type of summary that you can send to the council when you take this forward to them. I hope you will consider attaching that to any approval you make today. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the impervious surface. And I don't know if 70% is way too much for the RS2 and RS3. All I know is it's double what is in the requirement. And I think that a good way to, instead of trying to fight it, well, what's the right amount? To me, it goes back to your hydrology and your detention report. Whatever gets run and they say they can handle, then that's the percentage that they can use. We don't know what that's going to be. That should be up to probably the city engineer to back into those numbers, because when I look at those numbers, I'm going, no, that's too high. If a homeowner can't build their home, their pool, their basketball court, then they need to either build a smaller house, not put those amenities in, or buy a bigger lot. The other thing too about it is that they will have this place loaded with amenities, and I of course really enjoyed seeing that. They're gonna have a community pool, a playground, walking path, areas for people to probably play pickleball and basketball. So it's not like the whole community is a wasteland for, where there won't be any pools or anything. So, I'm sorry, Ms. Hilton. I know you get people, the husband coming and crying about his wife, but
Very sad.
that's, I'm sorry, you know, there's a reason why we have these in, our UDO now. So I'd just like to ask you to consider attaching to this somehow, not, instead of saying, well, we don't like this, do a different number for the percentages, rather to phrase it somehow that that percentage will be determined by the detention and hydrology. Thank you.
Charlotte. Anybody else wish to speak? All right, we're going to close the floor, back to the commission for further discussion. Sean?
Is there any reason legally why, because they paid for the EPA report, would it be commonplace to require a copy of that to the city, since that would be then public record, or is that normally, I've never seen that before released publicly?
On the property north of here, we do have a copy
We've
of
got a
the report. And in that case, it says that they can't do anything. So, and I include it in every single conversation we have about it, but, yeah, it's public record. It should be, it could be made accessible, I would think.
I'll go ahead and make a motion.
Okay.
Go ahead, no, you had a question?
Well, I just a comment. I mean, there's been a lot of comments about traffic, and by the way, thank you for everyone, applicant and everyone who spoke, coming tonight, speaking. I mean, I think we're just looking at this particular land use and voting on this. I mean, we are tasked with the whole city, and I was part of pushing for Elm being widened too, which I think it shows now that it was absolutely needed, especially with this development. And I did vote against one development because of that four-way stop sign. That's kind of my one big no vote. But we're not really traffic engineers. We're not here. I think we all agree we would need that, and there's jurisdictional issues with the county. But yeah, we need that, and I appreciate the push in bringing this up. But I don't know right now if we can do anything about that. So yeah.
But it's the same way we did that. I mean, you start with a concept and push behind the scenes, and hopefully get it done.
This is where we passed a motion to open 131st Street Bridge across the river, right?
Yeah, right.
I would like to make one more comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
On that. You know, I had some conversations with Marseille about this, and when we started the UDO process, had brought the fact that we're going to have a project like this one that was going to be underway in terms of conceptual and discussions and everything. I just want to make sure that the council, as well as ourselves, that we're conscious of that, because it's a lot. They're jumping through a lot of hoops to accommodate UDO, but those are additional changes and delays to their rollout of their project as well. And because this project kind of straddled that line, I just really encourage everyone to kind of take that in mind and be flexible when we try to take this to a vote and to move this forward, because they seem to be trying to do everything correctly. But it's a lot to go from one standard to another standard and making additional changes. So we talked about a whole lot. I'm hoping Brandon captured all this that we talked about for the report that Charlotte asked for. I'm quite sure he did. But you know, my whole thing is just making sure that we're conscious of the access points. I'm not asking for additional access points on 121st. I think that is a problem when you have too many. It slows the traffic up. It backs everything up. I just want to see those line up with what's already there. Because I've seen when you have the staggered, that's traffic issues as well and accidents. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, and then how we deal with the utility on 125th, the power lines. Because I can see the pole getting hit. Right now, we're averaging 3 new poles a year. I don't want to see 7. Be without power. So, but I probably should bring account all those comments for us. And I'll leave it up
Is
to,
that power pole and need to be incorporated in the motion?
I would like it. But
You could hire John to put in a generator for you.
I'm
But
sorry,
I'm gonna leave
I've
this.
got the smallest
I'm gonna leave
font.
this to John to wrap it up in terms of how he wants to present this motion.
Okay, we'll go ahead and make a motion. We approve JZ 22 PUD 135 with the additional provisions that the EPA report that's been provided will be submitted along with the proposal to council, and then also subject to any final evaluation of hydrology for the concerns for the impervious nature of the soil, and suggestions that have been made by city planning dealing with the appropriate number of access points.
I'll second that.
Leon Davis,
Yes.
Craig Bowman,
Yes.
David Randolph,
Yes.
Jeffrey Byer,
Yes.
John Brown,
Yes.
Chair Ross.
Yes. Other business, plan update?
Thank you. I will give you a quick update. I finally found the engineering report that I was trying to find. So as far as street improvements on 121st between Elm and Elwood, there's nothing in the works, but there is a trail expansion that has been funded. It says staff is preparing design drawings to install a trail on the north side of 121st Street from Elm to Elwood. There are funds in the budget for this project. Staff made an earlier request to INCOG for funding of this trail in the past. The design work for this project has begun. So that's 121st Street. So there's nothing on the books for expansion at this time.
So Jim, you'll be able to easily walk.
You
You can walk all the way there, you just can't drive.
You can use
I know, that was COVID fun.
your golf cart. And then on the street improvement project from on Elm, from 111th to 131st, it says right-of-way acquisition is underway and utility relocation plans are being coordinated with the design engineers and the utility companies. Consultant to modify roadway alignment on the south mile of the project by moving it west, and that's what Mr. Beckett was talking about. They're actually gonna dedicate more right-of-way between the two intersections at 121st and 131st. O&G has begun utility relocation on the north mile. AT&T will conduct a relocation, which will only be in the south mile once right-of-way has been acquired. Staff and consultant met with Cox Communications, blah, blah, blah. So, that's the streets update. I think it'll be pretty close. We may have a few houses built before the full.
So what happens when they want to put a new oil well on the property to the south and it causes water to come up through their drains? Who's going to be responsible for that?
Not the city planner. We deal with uses, that's the
That guy
question
tonight handled that really well.
He did,
Because he could have been really mad at 20,000. That's a lot of money in the Bowman house.
and I will definitely bring that up to the engineer and just see if they're aware of this happening in other places, to see what they have to say about it and how we might be able to.
Because what happens is they build these homes and then they're just like, see you later,
Yeah,
made our money.
There's quite a few more lots available right there in that area as well.
there's a couple of developers have looked at that area, so we probably will see something sooner rather than later. Nothing new to report in the planning world, except we did finally get the UDO. I didn't look at it again, I just quit looking at it because I found so many errors every time I just was livid and I just quit, so. It is what it is, and we'll just doctor it up in a couple of months. If
When
there's
do we
something
think we can see because I don't want to reprint my next copy.
No, I will
Yeah,
get, who would like a hard copy? I was gonna ask that, because I'll get it printed and back for you.
Coil binding?
Everybody, great. Coil binding is your preference?
Yeah.
All right, I'll get it. I had intended to do that. Brandon said, why? Because they all have a computer reminder, I'm just telling you
I
what
did
you
not.
Some of us find it hard to read.
said.
You can zoom in.
Yeah, I gotta move
So, anyway, I had planned to do that, I need to do it for myself as well. So, also, the RFP on the library lot, we've gone through that process, the selection committee has made their recommendation. Council has the information on the top two, candidates. And as far as I know, unless something changes between now and then, on the 19th, city council, that project will be considered for at least awarding it for contracting. I believe that's how, did you get the language on that?
I'm gonna talk to
The-
Teresa.
The library
She was
lot?
not here today, so I'm gonna talk to her.
What about Windows by Jeff? When's that deal gonna start?
Man, I really thought it was already gonna be done. I've literally heard it could be like any time.
Planning commission.
Also should be on the July 19th agenda for city council. So the mayor has selected someone and they will, they should be,
She's in the room.
no, she's not. Anyone in the room declined. There was a hard, no. So, yeah.
The engineer that presented tonight was very thorough.
Yes.
I would say more knowledgeable than any that
Yes.
typically we have present.
All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.